Good afternoon and welcome to the OM System 50 to 200 mm f2.8 IS Pro live event. In today's special event, I'd like to not only share the results of months of in-depth testing in the optical lab, but also in practice. I'd also like to give you the opportunity to ask me really anything about this lens. I put really the hours in and put this one through its paces, and the findings are actually quite interesting. There is a lot to talk about regarding this lens, as it is one of the very best lenses ever made, regardless of camera system. So welcome and thanks for joining live. A few remarks before getting started with this live session. First and foremost, this live session is not a substitute for my regular review, in-depth review, if I may say so. So there will be a 50 to 200 review on my channel, but I just wasn't able to finish it until the end of this year. And you know, as holiday season is coming up, well, there is a lot of stuff to do and a lot of stuff to finish. I've got a lot of client projects that I have to get out of the door. And as this lens is so special, I really don't want to take any shortcuts when filming the final review. Nonetheless, the test data is already there. I also have extensive practical experience with this lens, both in nature photography, but also in reportage and some sports photography. I use this lens as a portrait lens, so I really worked quite a bit with it. And so I thought it might be a good idea to really get online live and talk with you, because I got many emails with lots and lots of questions regarding this lens, also very specific questions regarding whether to buy this lens or not, where to invest your money. And of course, this is a substantial investment, and yeah, I think it's only reasonable to think twice before spending that much money on a lens and to really consider all the other options. And yeah, so if you have any questions regarding this, that's the time. But before we do that, so I think it's best to have the Q&A session at the end, but nonetheless, I'll be looking down on the screen and reading your questions, so I'll catch up during the stream. I'd like to get a few things out there first. I've also compiled all the lens data as well as a specific written review on my website. You can access it via thomaseisl.photography. Then there you can navigate to reviews, which we're gonna do together in a few minutes, because this is gonna be my reference for today's presentation. And there you get all the test data. So you really, if you wanna buy the lens right now, you can already access all the data and make an informed buying decision. What I'd also like to highlight is that producing reviews with this depth and this amount of technical analysis, well, this is not something that I can do in a couple of hours. This really takes weeks and weeks of testing, a lot of hours in the lab, a lot of trial, well, not trial and error, but a lot of retesting, because the problem with ultra high performance lenses is that they are so sharp, they deliver such high resolution figures that it basically outperforms your test setup constantly. So you have to change test distances, change test targets. So this is a very labor intensive process, but only when going through that with all due diligence, I can present objective data and yeah, really be confident in my statements. So how can I do that? Well, as you know, I'm not an OM System ambassador. I'm not sponsored financially by anyone except by you. So I really rely on your financial support. So how can you support my work? Well, there are actually a few ways, but the most efficient one, and I think the one that offers quite a few benefits for you as well, is by becoming a channel member. Channel membership is a monthly small fee, which really helps me to budget for video production and for lens reviews like this one. And it also comes with a lot of added benefits. There is a dedicated channel member exclusive library. And for example, this live stream, if you are not able to watch it live, you can rewatch it in this dedicated channel member library. So that is another benefit you can watch at the time of your convenience. So thanks for considering that. Please consider supporting my work, because that's the only way I can do these in-depth reviews. Of course, you can also leave a super thanks in the chat, which would also be appreciated. Now that I've got this one out of the way, I'd like to officially welcome everyone once again. So hello to England, hello to California, hello to Minnesota. That is great. So I truly appreciate that all of you are joining. Now, without further ado, I'd like to navigate to the website. So it's thomaseisl.photography, and there we're going to view the review really quick. And I go through the main points. The reason why I'm doing this is also not just to read out technical data, but to really explain what some of these results mean. And I want to really go the extra mile there to provide you data and insights, which I also won't be able to include in the dedicated video review itself. So whenever I bring up a data point and you've got any questions, well, then this live stream is the opportunity to ask me directly. Now, without further ado, let's transition over there. And so this is my website, thomaseisl.photography. It is on the one hand my professional portfolio, but of course it is also the home base for any reviews and articles, and there are lots of them. So you can go to magazine and click reviews, and there you can find all the reviews. And today, of course, we're gonna look at this one, which went online a few minutes ago. So the OM system M.Zuiko 50-200 f2.8 Pro. As you know, I'm not primarily a wildlife photographer, so such long focal lengths are not really lenses which are like on a high priority list for me. And also those are not really lenses where I'm like super excited about it. But nonetheless, this lens indeed got me very excited. And for a very specific reason, because it is one of those, at least it was advertised as such, one of those no compromise lenses. So a lens which is very costly to make, but also one which should not really come with any downsides in terms of image quality without any compromise really. So is it possible to make such a lens? Is this one such a lens? I have to admit, I kind of gave it away. It is indeed such a lens, but let me get a sip of coffee first before we dive into all the details. So this is live right now, so if you want to read along or if you want to look at the graphs yourself, feel free to navigate there. So, honestly, I'd like to read out the executive summary because I think it really sums up what this lens is all about. So the OM system M.Zuiko 50-200 represents a watershed moment in optical engineering. At the time of writing, or speaking in this case, it stands as the definitive benchmark for zoom lenses in this field of view range, irrespective of camera systems. Capable of prime lens performance, very big emphasis on that, endowed with rapid autofocus acquisition and distinguished by uncompromised build quality, it is indeed the singular solution for the discerning professional who demands the very best without concession. This lens is really that good. So, of course, it is a very complex lens, but even though it is a very complex lens, it is a lens. Here's the lens diagram. It is a lens which, at least my sample here, right, my lens, it's not my sample, this is my lens, I own this one, shows very little sample variation. So I tested this lens and it exhibits near perfect centering. Also, I found that the aberrations are the very few aberrations that are even there are very evenly distributed. So this really shows that during the manufacturing process, OM system paid extra care to really give you the highest end possible assembly precision that you can get for a lens priced as high as this one. And I'd like to talk about the price really quick, because this is maybe something that you have in mind. This is actually a very inexpensive lens. A lens of this quality it's actually quite hard to believe that you can own it at this price point. In terms of absolute performance and craftsmanship, it definitely ranks with lenses such like the Leica 50mm Apo lenses, the Apo lenses. So this is really one of the very best lenses ever made, and for that it is really inexpensive. So that is just what I wanted to highlight there. Now let's move down to the next part, design engineering and ergonomics. So of course, this is a quite substantial lens. Without the tripod collar, it comes in at about 1000 grams, right? So with all the stuff on there that you might want, we get up to 1250 grams. So that sounds like quite a bit of weight, right? But at the end of the day, it is not really that bad, as you always have to keep in mind that it offers absolute superior optical performance and build quality. Speaking about, talking about build quality, I'm gonna go back really quick to the big screen. So talking about build quality, the exterior of the lens is made out of, so there are metal parts, there are industrial grade polymer parts, and what is really interesting is that the plastic in and of itself and also the metal parts in and of itself are white, right? Well, that's a good thing, but they are also extremely durable when it comes to abrasion, and also they exhibit some oleophobic properties. Because when you work with such lenses outdoors, you get a lot of stuff on there. For example, I had new outdoor clothes on when I was testing this lens, and of course the colors, the dyes rubbed off on the lens. But nonetheless, just with a plain microfiber cloth, I was able to get it all clean and white and shiny. So even such small details like the exterior coatings are just superb. In terms of handling, of course, this one feels very much like the other big white, the 150 to 400 in the OM system's lineup. So the rubber is pretty similar to that. Also the feel of the buttons and so on and so forth is excellent. Nonetheless, there is a very small point which warrants a bit of critique. Well, not critique, you just have to know it. And that is the size of the physical switchgear on the lens. Of course, it is quite big. It is also big compared to competitors in other sensor formats. But nonetheless, I wish that those buttons would be even bigger, because I went to the Austrian Alps on extended hikes photographing the wildlife there. I'm going to show you a few images in a few minutes. And I noticed that when you wear very, very thick gloves, well then, you know, a button just cannot be big enough, right? That's just a thing. It's not really, so those are not small buttons by any means. They are actually quite big, but really I would love them to be even bigger. The bigger the better in this case. So now let's move on to a very interesting point regarding the size, and you already saw that on the screen previously. There you can see it again. So here's a comparison. I put the 100 to 400, the 50 to 200 and the 40 to 150 side by side. So I've also got these lenses here. So this is my 150, 40 to 150 f2.8, and this is the 100 to the 50 to 200 IS Pro, the new one. So there is a substantial difference, but it is very important to keep in mind that the 40 to 150 f2.8, even though it is a very good lens, it is nowhere near as good as the 50 to 200. This is really like comparing a very, very good BMW to a handmade Maybach, right? So this is just a whole different category of lens. So both in terms of optical performance and also, of course, in terms of in terms of optical performance, that's really it there. And also, of course, focal length range. So really, it is a substantial lens, but it is not too big to handle, right? Of course, here's another nice close-up I'd like to show you, where you can really see the detailed detail of the coating. So the OM system really put a lot of effort in there, and the overall feel of this lens is just superb. It is a high-end professional tool. Another aspect that I'd like to highlight here is that the lens has a polymer front ring, right? This is a feature found on most OM System Pro lenses, and the big advantage of that is that even in cold situations, if the filtering gets stuck, if the filtering cannot get stuck, that's the point. The filtering cannot get stuck because you've got two thermal expansion properties, therefore, and yeah, that is, so there are all these small details which make this lens truly greater than the sum of its parts. Now I won't go into too much detail when it comes to handling. I will do that in the future video, but of course I'd like to highlight other properties and really give you some practical impressions there. One true highlight is, of course, the image stabilization system. So we got 5.5 EV steps with the lens only, which is important to know. If you're a Panasonic Lumix photographer, then you also get these 5.5 EV, and you get up to 7 EV at 200 mm if you use an OM system camera with compatible 5-axis Sync IS. So I'm talking about OM system OM3, OM1 and OM1 Mark II. Those are capable of delivering these levels of performance. So what does that mean in practice? Well, actually quite a lot. The point here really is that you can put all sorts of fancy numbers in there, and you can have, like, I don't know, 11 EV and whatsoever, but really where the rubber hits the road, right? That's the saying, where the rubber hits the road is always the practical application. And what is really important about this one, and what is really important to highlight, is that this lens is able to detect very small movements, and in conjunction with the configurable image stabilizer of your OM system camera, you can handhold this lens and get stabilization performance even when panning. Very effective and very important for the bird photographer. You can also change the settings so that you get better stabilization performance when you're in a car. I tried that quite a bit, because of course the system has to adapt its gyro sensors and stabilize the system accordingly. So there's a lot of things that go into that, which go way beyond just a mere figure of 7 EV at 200 mm, even though that is incredibly impressive. That is incredibly impressive in and of itself, right? Be that as it may, I'd like to bring up OM Workspace really quick. I just dumped a few JPEGs in there, and I'd like to show you just a few images right there. And what I find interesting, or what I find most notable here, is, for example, a sample image like this one. Doesn't look like much, right? It's just a close-up shot. But really, if you consider it, This is a close-up which was captured. Which was captured at an equivalent 35mm focal length of 400mm. And you can see it is tack sharp. Shutter speed was 1/160 seconds. So really the image stabilization system is absolutely outstanding when coupled with a professional grade OM system camera. In fact, it is so good that I regularly use shutter speeds with 1/30th of a second, 1/60th of a second, and even when using one of the teleconverters, something I'd like to talk about in particular, you still have this very high image stabilization performance. So overall, very impressive. Don't forget that this lens also offers an aperture of f2.8, so really the combination of f2.8 and the overall image stabilization performance, well, you can shoot in low light situations with this lens like with no other. Even when attaching a teleconverter, you still get bright enough apertures to really work in challenging circumstances. So I'm hyped. I have to admit, I'm hyped. So let me bring up another aspect here, and that is, of course, such a thing like I've also analyzed, and you can read through that yourself. I'm not going to do that live. I've also examined the close focusing capabilities of this lens, and I'd say while it is a truly excellent macro lens with the teleconverter attached, the most remarkable thing about it is not only that it is able to focus as close as it can. With the MC20, you can get a magnification of 1:1, 35mm equivalent at a focal length of 200mm and a focusing distance of approximately 78 centimeters. So that is impressive. That's a good working distance. And if you do the math behind all of that, and that is what I'd like to highlight here, then you would come to the conclusion that this is actually impossible. So you cannot focus a 200mm lens at 78 centimeters and get this magnification. And the way the OM system M.Zuiko 52-200 is actually able to do that is by actually shifting the focal length. So the closer you focus, the focal length shifts. This is normal behavior and desirable behavior, by the way, in modern high-end lenses. And the OM system 52-200 does exactly that. And this gives you two things. This gives you these incredibly high magnifications. It gives you excellent aberration control. So the lens does not really show more aberrations when you focus close up. And I'm going to show you the image in OM Workspace once again. So this is an out-of-camera JPEG, nothing fancy. And you can see there are 0 optical aberrations in there. You might have noticed in lesser lenses that you can see aberrations once you focus these lenses close up. But that is not an issue with the 52-200. So that is also one of these benefits. And another thing, and this is really exciting in my opinion, and that is the fact that the lens, due to this very well controlled change of focal length, does maintain perfect field of view integrity. So there is no focus breathing, absolutely none. I tried really hard to detect that. There is nothing. Also, it is perfectly parfocal. So this means the plane of critical focus stays in the same place no matter whether you zoom the lens or not. So this allows you to do crazy things in practice. For example, you can zoom in. You know, I'm going to do that. You can zoom in, you see, internal zooming, and then focus on the bird, whatever, and then zoom out to the final composition and get the shot. And this is an incredible way to nail critical focus, especially in extreme circumstances. And you cannot do it with most lenses because most of them are somewhat parfocal, but not 100% precisely parfocal. But the 52-200 is one of these lenses, which is absolutely perfectly parfocal. So really, there are a lot of things to get excited about when it comes to this lens. But the most important thing, in my opinion, apart from all these things which are interesting in practice and actually make or break a lens way more, what is really interesting and what was also a question in the comment section is, of course, the lens's optical performance. So here is a thing. Before I talk about the optical performance and bring up some fancy MTF graphs, which took a lot of effort to, to capture really, because this lens is so good, I'd like to highlight a few things. So you can watch reviews on YouTube, in the internet, whatever, and you're gonna get input like, oh, well, this is a very sharp lens, or it looks as sharp as, or you can have reviews where they put two images together and say, oh, I think this one is a little bit sharper than the other one. So these videos are, well, they exist, but in terms of really examining the performance of a lens, they are absolutely useless. There are just too many variables in there, and the deductions that come out of these videos are, well, dubious at best, and I highly recommend not getting too much, not giving too much about these subjective assessments, because the only real way to get objective comparable figures, which you can compare, by the way, across different reviews, is to go in the optics lab and to perform very controlled testing, and only then you really know how good a lens is. So now, one of the arguments often is, well, Thomas, why do you do these tests? I mean, it's about photography, right? And we just want to, it's about the image, and cameras and lenses are good enough, and so on and so forth. That is true. But the real question is, if you invest so much money in the lens, at least I want to know, and you probably as well, how good is it really? And buying decisions are not always like, okay, am I gonna get the 50-200 or am I gonna get the 40-150 in the OM system? No, buying decisions are also sometimes, should I get an equivalent Panasonic lens, or should I maybe even change camera systems and go to a different camera system, because there I can get even better performance for more money, but nonetheless. So there are many parameters, and really to come to a very educated buying decision, you have to have these numbers, which I'm going to bring up on the screen right now. So far so good, everyone is with me until I come to the spatial frequency response, right? Because that's the crazy part. No, really, spatial frequency response isn't that crazy. So what that is basically a measurement of contrast performance of the lens with a specific camera. So in this case, it's the 50-200 obviously, and the camera was the OM system OM1. So all these figures can be extrapolated to the OM1 Mark I, OM1 Mark II, OM system OM3, and to a lesser degree also to the Panasonic G9 Mark II. And so those are actually relatively similar cameras in terms of MTF, system MTF. Be that as it may, what did I find? So I found that the 50-200 is actually near perfect. It is as good as a lens for the Micro Four Thirds system can physically get at this point. So what does this mean? This lens is actually out-resolving. Every photographic lens is out-resolving the digital sensor. That is a topic for another video, which will be online next year. But the point here really is, the lens achieves the physically highest possible MTF 50 performance at an aperture setting of around f4 throughout the whole focal length range. So this means there is no sharper lens at f4 in existence for Micro Four Thirds. There is even more to that. At its very best, this lens sets a record of resolving power per millimeter, regardless of camera system. So this is not just one of the very best lenses, well, the very best lens for Micro Four Thirds. This is also, in terms of optical performance, a milestone in the camera world, in the photography world. It is absolutely mind-boggling, really. I've actually only seen such high figures from very, very few Micro Four Thirds lenses. For example, the 17mm f1.2 by OM system, outstanding lens. But really, in terms of zoom lenses, this is not just spectacular, it is insane. So what does this tell us? The lens actually resolves, and that is important, about 1,600 line pairs per picture height. And if you look at this graph, you can see the contrast performance across the frame. So on the right hand side you see the center of the frame, and then to the left that is towards the edges of the Micro Four Thirds frame. And you can see that these lines are almost perfectly straight. The only variances that you see in there are actually from the test chart itself, because you cannot physically produce a test chart which is flat enough and printed precisely enough so that you actually get valid numbers with the 52-200. As it is basically measuring the accuracy of the test chart, not the performance of the lens. It is really outstanding. It's hard to believe, honestly. So you not only get these high resolving power figures in the center of the frame, you get them across the whole image frame. So whether you crop off center or not, it's not a problem. The lens resolves so much detail actually that from f4 onwards the sharpness declines, obviously because it is a truly diffraction limited lens in a strict sense. Now you see that I said, well, at f2.8, by the way, it is not, it doesn't really reach the physical maximum, right, that you can calculate. It falls a little bit short, and the reason for that is pretty simple. Well, I was able to actually deduct via the principle of exclusion, right? I looked at all various factors, and I suspect that the summation of really a lot of really minuscule, you know, let's say not issues, but just, you know, thermal expansion, atmospheric disturbances, and so on and so forth. All of these together really combined, they lead to a slightly less resolving power because of some spherical aberrations which are, well, detectable, right? So that's, but you cannot see these spherical aberrations. So really, if you look at the picture at f2.8 and then you compare it to an f4, you cannot see any halos or anything like you would in lesser lenses. So this is more of a geek thing, but now you know, right? So, but from f4 onwards, this lens is as good as any lens will ever be on an OM system OM1 camera. There is no lens which can be better. It's pretty exciting. It's pretty exciting. So I will look at the chat really quick so that I see whether you all whether I lost someone there. So there are very specific questions, but I see most of you are still with me there, and so I will address those questions later. I think it's better for the flow to just continue. Now at this point, I also tested the chromatic aberrations. So I mentioned the term apochromatic lens. And what does this mean? Apochromatic lens means that red, green, and blue, so the three components that your camera sensor see, focus essentially at the same distance. And this is exactly what is happening with this lens. So it gets the color components really close. It is physically impossible, by the way, to really get all three components to focus in the exact same spot, but it is possible to correct a lens so much that all these components are so close that the projected radius of the blur circle of the separate color channels is actually small enough so that you cannot detect it because it is smaller than the airy disk. So the airy disk is basically the smallest circle a lens can be focused to. So más o menos, right? So that's a rough explanation there. Bottom line here is that I was able to detect this defocus error only when putting actually when actually setting up a test bench going across multiple rooms. Only then I was able to measure this light spread, which is of course invisible, and therefore the 50-200 truly fulfills the apochromatic criterion, and that is of course also detectable and visible in the MTF50 test data that you saw there. So really it is as good as a lens can physically be in this world, as long as the rules of physics still apply, right? Good. Also, another almost no chromatic aberrations, on just a few in the extreme edges, Monochromatic aberrations, as I said, there are none. And one of the most interesting feats of the 52-200 that I'd like to mention here is the fact that it is almost free of vignetting. And you can see these two graphs. So there you can see the vignetting at 50 millimeter, and over there the vignetting at 200 millimeter. And f2.8, that is very important. And the fall off is always below 1 EV. So only one stop below maximum illumination. And this is absolutely fantastic, as competing lenses, and I'm talking about larger sensor formats, exhibit fall off exceeding 1.5 EV and even more. So what does this mean in practice? I want to highlight that because it's like, oh yeah, Thomas is reading fancy figures and it sounds great, but what does that mean in practice? Let me elaborate. This means that when you've got a strong vignette, your camera has to correct that, and it does so by boosting the signal. Boosting the signal means more noise. While you won't be able to see that at first glance, this boosting and noise actually deteriorates the resolving power of the lens to a degree, because you've got more noise in there that you have to amplify. So the system resolving power, to be more precise, not the lens's resolving power, it stays the same, right? So there are many points in there, and those are mostly, they are to a degree of an academic nature, but it is important to note that the 52-200 has no such issues. So it delivers this clean image almost perfectly across the whole frame. And once you stop the lens down to f4 and to f5.6, the vignetting is completely gone. Now here's the thing, the vignetting is also completely gone at f2.8 because OM system automatically corrects any vignetting in camera, right? But nonetheless, even in the raw data, the unmodified data, then the vignetting is really gone if you stop down just a little bit. So it is a superb lens also in that regard. Now let's get back to one last thing, bokeh. So bokeh, or as I like to call it, the point spread function manifestation, right, is actually a very interesting thing to look at. First and foremost, you can examine the character of the lens, and you can also determine whether a lens exhibits any aberrations and how the aberrations are corrected. So what we see here, if you look at these two fancy graphs, which are plots of these bokeh balls. So I took the bokeh ball and I basically plotted the diameter, the intensity of the diameter, and that's what you see on there. We can see that these are almost perfectly flat. This means that OM systems engineers managed to achieve almost perfect spherical aberration correction, almost perfect, even at f2.8. And as I previously said, there is some spherical aberration in there, but one that you cannot see, and you can barely measure it by making some deductions, which are actually quite complicated based on MTF50 and other factors. So really, this lens is probably as close to perfect as we ever gonna get. Very impressive. Last but not least, I'd also like to highlight that the lens is extremely flare resistant. So this is of course a high intensity X100 light by Zhiyun, which I pointed directly at the lens, and even then it barely flares. So let me show you an example. In OM Workspace, of course. So let's transition there, and you can see OM Workspace. So this is an extreme backlit situation, and you can see there are barely any ghosting artifacts. There is one, whoops, let me enlarge that. There is one, but it is very small, and as you can see, the contrast is absolutely stunning. With any lesser lens, you wouldn't be able to see anything except the washed out flare across the whole frame. So this is really impressive. And this performance is also, well, the crucial element why the autofocus of this lens is so good. Even in backlit situations, you can, well, get focus lock absolutely reliable. Let's take a look at this one. So this is a backlit situation, and Even though it doesn't look like much, the experienced nature photographer knows that sometimes autofocus systems can fail in such situations. Not because the camera is bad, but because the flare actually interferes with face detection of the camera sensor, right? The face detection system. But take a look at this. Such things are not an issue with the OM1 and the 50-200. This is absolutely spectacular, also for professional sports photography. So I could go on and rave about how good this lens is, because it really is. But I think it's also time to, you know, to examine, to kind of get to the end of it and address your questions, right? Also, don't hesitate to write your question right in there. And if you didn't understand something that I said, just let me know. I'm going to go over it again with pleasure, because that's actually the point of having this session. It is really important. If you want to know how good this lens really is, well, then you really have to get the facts, right? So that's the point, and don't hesitate to ask me anything. So diffraction. So overall, that is fantastic. Now let's talk about teleconverter performance. So teleconverter performance, there is a block of text which I'm not going to look at with you. Teleconverter performance is a thing. So what does a teleconverter do? A teleconverter basically takes a portion, so I'm talking about a physical teleconverter, not the built-in teleconverter. It takes a portion of the image circle and magnifies it optically. So this is actually a pretty simple calculation if you look at it. If you've got a 2x teleconverter, you're going to get half the contrast performance of the original lens. And contrast performance is always synonymous with resolving power at the end of the day. More about that in an educational video next year. But at this point, just leave it with that. So this means you need a lens which is able to actually resolve double to get acceptable image quality. And here's the good news. This is the lens. The 50-200 paired with the MC20 teleconverter actually gives you a 100-400 lens with a maximum aperture of f5.6. And this combo with the MC20, which is over there, you know what? I'm going to attach it really quick, because why not? Also, it's a good thing that I put the lens down for a second, because I've got the feeling that I'm going to throw it through the room really quick. So this is with the MC20 on there. That's the little black cap. Now it's a 100-400 f5.6, and this lens is optically almost as good as the 100-400 Mark II natively. And keep in mind that the 100-400 Mark II is an outstanding super telephoto lens. This is not an amateur's tool. This is a veritable high-end imaging machine. So really, you have to keep that in mind. And this combo is almost as good. And once you stop down to let's say f6.3, which is coincidentally the maximum aperture of this lens at 400 millimeter, then the difference is honestly very academic. You can see it maybe side by side, but mostly you can just see it in the lab. And the fact that this lens is able to deliver such stunning resolution, and you can basically use it penalty-free with a teleconverter, also answers the question of one of you in the chat who asked, well, how good is this lens for the Panasonic G9 Mark II with its 25 megapixels? So let's be very clear. This lens with the OM system OM1 achieves resolving power and imaging performance that doesn't rival other micro four thirds cameras. It rivals 35 millimeter sensor cameras, aka, I'm going to say it only once because I hate that word, full frame, because micro four thirds is also full frame. But be that as it may, full frame, I said it, well, now I said it a second time. Now, so jokes aside, we are talking about a level of image quality that is hard to believe. It is really hard to believe. You have to experience it, and you have to go to my website, read through all the text that I wrote there, which is hopefully entertaining and informative, and then you get a grasp how good this lens really is. So yes, you can put that not only on the 25 megapixel Panasonic G9 Mark II, you can also use the high-res shot feature and get absolutely crazy resolving power and detail. So it is actually impossible to measure the resolving power of this lens really by any sensor technology that is available today. So I think that that should answer this question, how good this lens really is. So I talked a lot, which means I have to drink a lot, and I'm gonna close this one over here. So I'm gonna take a second to scroll through the comments. Yeah, well, I'm seeing a lot of contributions there. So thanks for that. Thanks for sticking with the monologue. I'd say before I talk about the next chapter, which is in my opinion very important, it is more of an open discussion where I'd really like to engage with you and think about what such a lens means actually, not just for photography, but also for the Micro Four Thirds system itself. It's actually quite exciting. But before I do that, I'm going to go through your questions regarding the optical performance. So let me scroll up there. I'm going to take a look at the top chat really quick. So there is an interesting question. My wife is interested in the differences in image quality and accuracy and speed of capturing focus with this lens and with the 2x teleconverter and with the 1.4x teleconverter and her existing 40-152-200. So one thing is important. What is the same? So it's about autofocus performance. In general, it is important to note that the autofocus performance of this lens is the very best. It is the very best. And in order to show you how good it is, actually, I'm going to go back to OM Workspace, my absolute favorite image editing program for RAW development, because it's the best for multiple reasons. I'd like to bring up a few shots which don't look like much at first glance, but they are actually a very good way to showcase the autofocus performance and of course the unbelievable image quality. So I was in the Austrian Alps. It was snowing heavily, like heavily. And of course I was with the OM1 Mark I, by the way, so not the best OM system camera, but the second best, right? And look at that. The autofocus system is actually so good and so high performance that even the snow particles weren't able to distract it. And if you say, oh well, Thomas, that's just some random animal in the snow, well then let me elaborate. This shot was captured at 1/40 of a second at f2.8, so stunningly sharp, and believe it or not, the ISO setting, I have to look it up, was 12,800. This is an image captured at ISO 12,800, no noise reduction in the OM system OM1, straight out of camera JPEG, so I can make this image 10 times better with a few clicks, right? So this is really just a basic. And the autofocus system was able to perform in what is practically near darkness. So any one of you who follows me on my Instagram, thomaseisl.creates, was able to follow me live actually up there in the Austrian Alps. And you could see that it was so dark that my smartphone camera was barely able to even film anything. So you could just see faint shadows, because it's really, I mean, this is like almost pitch black. It looks like it's not pitch black because I boosted the ISO like crazy. So what does this tell us about system performance? This lens is as good as it gets. And the problem why the 50-150 is not as good as it gets in comparable situations is actually as follows. This has to do with two things. First and foremost, aberration control. This lens is very sharp, but it is nowhere near as sharp as the 50-200. Keep in mind that this is an engineering feat which was probably impossible just a few years ago. This is a lens that easily outperforms all competitor lenses. It is really that good. The 40-150, however, is excellent, but it wasn't designed to be the absolute very best of everything, right? It was designed for a specific high-end price point. It is an outstanding lens. And it was also designed mostly to be used like 40-150 natively. While you can attach the teleconverter, you can see the significant, well, not significant, you can see a degradation of image quality. And this is because of the things I said earlier. The spherical aberrations and everything, that all defects that this lens has, which are invisible to see, the 40-150, right? I'm talking about this one. I'm gonna hold it up. Which are impossible to see in the normal focal length range. They are doubled when you attach the MC20. And what is an aberration? A lens aberration is basically something that isn't quite sharp. It could be color channels out of focus. It could be like spherical aberrations. So those are like this fuzziness, right? So all of these things, and they are enlarged. And what does that mean? Your autofocus system cannot see as well as again. So the autofocus system also sees, oh, it's a bit, German word in there, it's a bit unsharp. So really, this means basically that then it gets harder and harder for the camera to focus. And this, in situations like the one that I showed before with this buffalo-esque animal there, actually that would be harder to do with the 40-150. Not impossible, absolutely not, but harder to do. And this is actually where this lens comes in. And if you really want better autofocus performance, no, let me emphasize that the very best autofocus performance, you need an ultimately well-corrected lens. And this one is it, because even if you attach the 2x teleconverter, there are just no defects that you can magnify. That's of course a bit hyperbolic, but you get the point, because of course there are some defects, but negligible, really. So that is the point. I hope I was able to answer that. So then there is another remark. I love my 50-200. It's better than the 150. It's a hair better than the 150-400. That is quite possible. I haven't had time to put my 150-400 through all these optical tests. As I said, they take weeks and weeks where I cannot do a single client shoot, where I cannot do anything else but just spend time in the lab, and it's basically unpaid work. So so I always have to make room for that. I finance that basically on my own. So again, please contribute to the channel. Please become a channel member. It is really important if you want me to see doing these videos in the future as well, and these tests. But it's on my list, and it's quite possible that the 150-400 isn't as sharp. And that is, of course, we have to always keep in mind the extreme focal length range. It is actually one of the 7 world wonders that this 150-400 is as good as it is. It is unbelievable actually that they were able to build this perfect lens for this focal length range. And of course the 150-400 is even more challenging to build, even further focal length, even a longer focal length range, right? Higher magnification. So quite possible it might quite possibly be that it is a hair sharper. Also consider that you might not have focused the lens exactly the same way like you did the previous one. So to really get the objective comparison, wait for my review, which you will hopefully all contribute to come to life by becoming a channel member and making a small donation. I would highly appreciate that, really. So let's go through the next questions. When looking at the back opening of the lens, the back element appears to be somewhat loose and moving around. Yeah, that is most likely the image stabilizer there, so I think someone in the comments already answered that. My understanding is the zooms, and there are zooms in multifocal length multifocal lenses, so that is maybe pardon me that I won't address this here because it would kind of lead in a general optics discussion and not really about the 50-200. So there is the MTF question, and another interesting another question here is Okay, have you tried focus stacking for landscape images? And this is interesting because of a couple of things. But first I need, wow, I'm talking a lot today, but really I have to share my excitement for this product. Well, this is not a product, this is it's a milestone, really, and there is so much more to say. This was actually homemade punch, yeah, Austrian punch, but it's cold by now. Anyway, let's go back to that. So, focus stacking landscape images. What does that actually mean? You've probably noticed that when you capture a landscape and focus stack images, that the just gonna put the lens away, that the images get a little bit sharper. And the reason why that happens is because usually by focus stacking you are shifting the plane of critical focus, then you are applying a certain mathematical composition algorithm built into your OM system camera. And what this does actually, to a degree, it averages out, it averages out the aberrations. So if you have a lens like the 40-150, which has some residual aberrations, unlike the 50-200, which has none, practically none, at least not around f4, then you get a sharper image, right? The image is a bit sharper then. And here's the point. I did try focus stacking with this lens. It works, right? And you can get a little bit better images at f2.8 in terms of absolute sharpness, because there are some residual monochromatic aberrations, as I previously said. But it is not a huge improvement when you stop down just a little bit, because the lens is so sharp So yes, you can do it, but you probably want to do it to increase depth of field. You don't want to do it to increase image quality or control the aberrations. So that's my long but precise answer regarding this question. James Heupel, thank you so much for joining. Thanks so much for becoming a channel member. That is fantastic. I want to call you out publicly, because really it is absolutely necessary to have channel memberships, and I truly appreciate anyone who is willing and able to contribute. Thank you very much. So then one comment reads, very good colors, relatively light, useful for events and animals. I assume that this is a remark regarding the 50-200. Now, allow me to quote Mr. Peter Kabe from Leica, so head of optics designs of Leica. I met him personally a few years ago, had a very interesting discussion with him indeed. And he was doing a presentation about apochromatic lenses. As you know, for the Leica M system, there are certain lenses which have the Leica label APO. So what does that mean? As I previously said, the color channels focus in the same spot. And now if you think about it, what does it mean if the color channels do not focus in the same spot? Apart from the loss of sharpness, this also means that the lens cannot physically render the colors 100% accurately, because you've basically got colored images which are not 100% aligned, and then you can get slight color casts. You can observe that, for example, that some lenses appear to change colors once you stop them down. That is a sign of a lens not being apochromatically corrected. But here's the thing, the 50-200 is an apo lens. And this was a thing that Mr. Kabe highlighted back then as well. Accurate colors are one of the fantastic traits of apochromatic lenses. The downside is, of course, there is no character. This lens feeds the data to your sensor, to your camera sensor, as the real world is. It is perfection, not character. Indeed, if you looked at the bokeh, there is some character in it, but more on that in the website article and the upcoming review. But really the point here is really that this apochromatic correction gives you these stunning colors, and you have to experience that in practice to really see that. And then you can also see what your OM system camera, your Panasonic camera, whatever camera you attach to this lens is really capable of. It is an experience, to be honest. It is an experience. Yeah, there is another contribution. Fantastic. So regarding noise performance of OM system cameras, also always appreciated. That is also an interesting. Yeah, of course. Honestly, the real problem with Micro Four Thirds, I wouldn't say Micro Four Thirds, but with camera gear in general, is that first and foremost, people don't really know what they have, and people don't work with the stuff long enough, and they kind of get the feeling that there is, you know, the grass is greener somewhere else. But now I really have to tell you, with this lens, there is no greener grass anywhere. This lens achieves full frame, almost full frame resolving power, and this is actually, it's nuts to a degree, because physically it is almost impossible to resolve more detail with a smaller sensor than with a bigger one. That is just a fact. That is a fact. But of course, you resolve more than enough detail with Micro Four Thirds. Actually, you resolve double as much detail as you will ever need for any print size. And now add this lens and you get performance very similar to what you get with a camera with 4 times the sensor size. So this is really incredible, and this shows actually why this lens is so special. And this is the transition that I'd like to make today, to talk about Micro Four Thirds in general, and to talk about the significance of this lens. And for that, I'd like to go back to the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, Olympus, Kodak, Leica, by the way, Fuji, I think, was also part of that, but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure about Fuji. No, I think Fuji wasn't there. In any case, Olympus, Leica, Kodak, they came together and designed the 4/3 standard. And the idea was to design a digital camera system for professionals, not for hobbyists, but for professionals. So the best possible image quality, but really for digital. And the approach was, first and foremost, get a sensor which requires little to no cropping when you print because of the aspect ratio of 4:3, right? And also to make it a perfect telecentric lens, image space telecentric, so that the rays that exit the exit pupil of the lens are perfectly perpendicular to the sensor surface. And the other thing that they said, okay, how do we get the resolving power that professionals need, that you need for printing very big, so 2 meters, whatever? You have to design the very best lenses. And if you are old enough to remember, Olympus, for the E system, which was a single lens reflex system, they had the top pro line of lenses. Those were incredibly expensive lenses, so they were in the ballpark of this one. And they were designed basically hand-picked, you know, so every element was as good as possible. This wasn't like a regular industrial production process. By the way, the 150 to 400 is currently produced in a very similar manner, and the 50 to 200 as well. And those lenses were so good that actually they elevated even the 5 megapixel Olympus E1 back then to deliver such high sharpness that you can basically print it with those cameras as big as you want. And now fast forward today, and you realize that there weren't that many top pro lenses or equivalent lenses in Micro Four Thirds, which is why many professionals also still adapt 4/3 lenses to Micro Four Thirds. I'm one of them, because there were very special lenses, especially the top pro lenses. And now OM system basically revived the top pro mentality. The mentality to build the best possible lens one can imagine, and yeah, deliver the image quality deliver more image quality than you would ever need and want. And this is exactly what happens here. And this is one of the main reasons why I'm so excited about this lens. this is not a lens I use a lot, to be frankly honest. I'm not the telephoto guy. I'm doing reportage, I'm doing portrait, I'm doing weddings. So weddings, I bring this one. But you know, it's not like a lens that I need. I've also got the 40-150, which is perfect for reportage photography and general sports photography. So it is not about the lens itself that I was like, oh, I need a 50-200. Also, I've got the excellent 50-200 for the 4/3 system, which by the way comes nowhere close to this one in terms of image quality, but that's a different story. But what really gets me excited is that this tells me that OM system is back to making lenses at high price points for those who need the very, very best, who are willing to pay for outstanding glass, top money, and get image quality, yeah, which is just a dream. And so this is what I said in the introduction when I'm going to talk about the significance of this lens in general. This is a pivotal moment, really, because it shows us that there is a willingness on OM Systems side to provide these ultra high performance lenses. Similar lenses in this top pro category, which no longer exists, right? It's just called the pro category, but similar examples are the 70, the 25, and the 45. Those are also outstanding lenses capable of outperforming any sensor to a degree that you actually cannot measure their contrast, their sharpness performance with current sensors. So we have to wait 5-10 years, if ever possible, for sensors to catch up with what these lenses can do. So incredible, and I love that. And here is a contribution. Here's a contribution, if I remember correctly. They designed the 4/3 300 millimeter. Was to resolve a 4/3 20 megapixel sensor. So that is an interesting point here. That is quite possible, but I have to go on a slight detour here because I think it's interesting in terms of lens design. I'm going to do a separate video about that in the future. But what I'd like to say here is that you cannot really no, let me rephrase that. So there is no lens in existence, even the very worst lenses, out-resolve all camera sensors. So I'm talking digital, medium format, whatever. So they are out-resolving that. Why? To out-resolve actually means that the lens projects detail with 10% contrast, so barely distinguishable detail, vanishing resolution as it is often called, and the sensor is able to record it. Now, digital sensors are, compared to analog film, notoriously bad at recording resolution. So it sounds like, wow, digital is like recording resolution left and right. That's not true. But digital is recording resolution at a high contrast. So the point here really is, I don't want to correct you on your contribution where you said they designed the 300 millimeter 4/3 in mind, 4/3 with the with a 20 megapixel sensor in mind, because they most certainly did. I don't know about that, but they most certainly did. If you say so, I believe you. But the difference is that they designed it so that MTF50, so which means the sharpness, MTF50 is the sharpness measurement, not the resolution really, but the sharpness is so high that even if you look at the 20 megapixel image in 1:1, it's crisp. And this is exactly what happens here. I said that this lens achieves an MTF50 performance, which is as good as physically possible on a 20 megapixel camera. So this means you cannot physically design a better lens for a 20 megapixel camera. Probably you cannot even design a lens better than for a 40 megapixel camera, but that remains to be seen until one comes out, right? So really it is just another performance level, and I'm talking not about resolving power, because even very bad lenses out-resolve any digital camera, but about sharpness or acuity. That's the point here, and it's very likely that 4/3 lenses, so the top pro lenses, were designed with those high megapixels in mind. So really the 4/3 standard is fantastic. So there is another question. What's the difference between a Leica branding, a lens, an aspherical and an apo lens? So that is an interesting point here. First and foremost, I'd like to say That is just, it's a bit a tangent, right? But I'm going to go on it. I'm going to go on a tangent. Is that the thing you say in English? I don't know. As you know, I'm German speaking, but that's my mother tongue. Be that as it may. 50 millimeters. So aspherical just means that the lens elements are ground in an aspherical way, and apochromatic means that the wavelengths, red, green and blue, are focusing within a certain distance of each other. So the first one just tells you someone ground an aspherical element, which, well, in all honesty, that's the fact with all camera lenses today, or most camera lenses, unless you buy a vintage designed camera lens. But apochromatic is something completely different. And I'm going to show you one thing. I'm going to go back to the website review really quick. Just to appreciate what OM System did here, we're going to scroll up. I highly recommend you checking out the article. There is tons and tons of information in there. I've worked on this article for weeks. Yeah, so I ran it through a test group who read it, and so it's really worth reading, I'd say. So here's the graphic. This is the lens design, and as you can see, there are many aspherical lenses. So those are lenses which are not ground symmetrically, but aspherically, right? So you can see there are tons of aspherical lenses in modern lens designs. So let's go back to the main view. And you know what? There's another question. Have you used the lens for portrait photography? Yes, I did indeed. But the images are not safe for work, so I cannot show them to you here live. Otherwise, yeah, this channel is going to be taken down probably. So if you want to see more of my work, especially if you want to see my not safe for work stuff, you have to follow thomaseisl.photography on Instagram, thomaseisl.photography on Facebook, and of course you can also follow thomaseisl.creates, which is actually this account that I really like to highlight that because I post a lot there and it's interesting stuff, I'd say. This is the account where I share educational pieces, behind the scenes, where you can shoot me a quick message, if there is something. You see a lot of stories, where do I travel? You sometimes see lens test data before I publish it elsewhere. You get informative reels. So this is really the place you want to go if you are interested in the technical side. And if you want to book me as a photographer, you should follow thomaseisl.photography. so that's the thing. So yes, it's an excellent portrait lens, even though a very sharp one. And that is not always good, right? So you have to have the right model for that. Otherwise, the person in front of the camera won't be flattered. Okay, so thank you very much. I think we've covered it all. The bottom line here really is that the OM System M.Zuiko 50-200 is a superb lens. And before I say my goodbyes and until next time, I'd like to show you a few images in OM Workspace really quick, because I think it's worth it. And I'm gonna disable that really quick. Oh. And you still have the opportunity to utilize the top chat. If you have any questions left, I'm going to do a quick question round at the end before I have to get back to work. So Ronnie, thank you very much. You're most welcome. Thanks for your interest in lens tests. So I'm going to show you a few images. So this one, interesting. This one showcases the. This one actually showcases the. Sorry, it's gone really quick. I have to bring that. So now you should be able to see your own workspace again. Yeah. So this one showcases the close focusing capabilities, and as you can see, again, ISO 3200. It's absolutely sharp. There are no aberrations whatsoever. It is absolutely crazy. Then this one, I really like this shot. Why? Because it showcases the excellent image stabilization performance, 1/125th of a second. Again, Austrian Alps, perfectly sharp. So there is really, I mean, what more do you need? You can print just the center portion of this image to wall size. There is no limit to that. This one might be even a little bit sharper. Yeah, look at that. There was less snow in between me and the is it a deer? Yeah, it's a deer. You can see that. So it's pretty crazy, pretty crazy. Then of course the big bad wolf. So this is a wolf. I met this fellow in the Austrian Alps actually. Thankfully the other ones were a bit further away, but that's a story for another day. So as you can see, perfectly sharp. And I could even crop the center portion and print just a portrait of it because the lens is just so sharp. And keep in mind, this one was captured at f2.8. So this is not so the lens gets even sharper. Then, of course, zoom capabilities, right? This is the 50 millimeter setting, and this is the 400 millimeter setting that we examined previously. Notice at the 50 millimeter setting, the pleasant bokeh. So this is a very busy scene, right? This is a very busy scene. And nonetheless, the bokeh is just very, very good. It's very neutral. And that is something that you appreciate as a professional. Then, of course, close focus, another mid-shot, mid-range, mid-focus distance shot. And look at the wonderful, wonderful bokeh balls here. This is really, the level of perfection, it's really second to none. So I could go on and talk maybe for another 2 hours right about this lens. It is really that good. Be that as it may, also this one, you know, sometimes you cannot get close enough to a bird, but in this case, take a look. No problem with the 150, with the 200, you can just crop in. Again, I'm actually impressed. So more bird shots. I just transferred a few, and this one is an interesting shot in my opinion, because as you can see, there is a lot of stuff going on, and for face detection systems that is actually quite hard to focus. But with the 50-200, the OM system OM1 is capable of nailing focus without any problems. And honestly, look at that. Look at that. The detail is just next level. Also keep in mind this was ISO, what was that? ISO 800, right? So, all right. What I'd also like to show, we already had this shot, but there is an interesting shot which shows the spatial frequency response, meaning the contrast. So those are unedited JPEGs, but look at that. Look at that. If I would have shown you this image like this, you'd say, wow, that's a neat image, but this is just a crop. Look at that. This is resolving power that is hard to get on any camera system really. So, and here, last but not least, another chick, right? So that's the type of chick that I can show here. Haha, pun. So there you can see, look at the details around the beak. Everything is there, and the slight fall off here is really just the image leaving the plane of critical focus. So this is really, it is spectacular. And here's another interesting thing. This, by the way, dear viewers, was captured with the MC14 teleconverter attached, as you can see here in the EXIF data. So this is not the very best this is not the best thing the lens can do. This is what the lens does with the teleconverter. It is unbelievable. It is truly unbelievable. Yeah. This is also a teleconverter shot. I'm going to zoom out really quick. Teleconverter MC14, perfect focus. I mean, this lens basically focuses at 50 frames per second. No issues at all. It's crazy. Yeah, I'm amazed. Honestly, I'm amazed, and I can't wait to compile the full review next year. But first, it's time for for winter holidays, right? Sometimes a break is good, but you know what? I'm still contemplating whether I'm going to bring the 50-200 or the more compact 100-400 Mark II. But I think I'm going to go with the 50-200, you know, just because it's a bit heavier, but it is optically just. So I'm going to address the last questions in the live chat. Eric, thank you so much. Eric, thank you so much for becoming a channel member. I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. It is great to have you. And I truly appreciate all the other channel members which are in the chat right now or who want to rewatch this video at a later point. And also everyone, thanks for joining, really. So I truly appreciate it. Also, don't forget, join thomaseisl.creates Instagram. There are also live streams which are, well, sometimes really spontaneous and but fun, I'd say. So go there as well. I see you there. Now, next question. Now we finally have this 50-200 for Micro Four Thirds. I wonder if we will revisit the 12-60, 2.8 and 60, or do a new 12-60 f2.8 with internal. Well, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Always keep in mind there is the excellent Panasonic Leica 12-60 f2.8 to f4, which is an excellent lens. And also interesting is getting the 4/3 12-60 f2.8 to f4, which is available for 300 to 400 euro in good condition. So it's still an excellent lens with a face detection OM system body. So keep that in mind. Any photos with the MC20? I think I have to admit my schedule is really full. I forgot to transfer any MC20 photos to OM Workspace. But the point here really is, if you own, so that you can get an idea, because I cannot, you know, I would have to run to my main workstation and get the photos. If you own a 100-400 Mark II, very important. The Mark II is optically better than the Mark I. Because of tighter production controls, that's my suspicion there. So the 100-400, it is like the 100-400, but a tiny bit softer, tiny bit. If you stop both lenses down to f8, they are indistinguishable. So that's the performance there. Hi Thomas, do you think I can replace my 90mm macro with both converters? Difficult question. But I want to address it nonetheless. You have to keep in mind that choosing a macro lens is mostly, it's about image quality, right? But it's mostly about close focus distance, working distance. Because you want, depending on the subject you photograph, right? I mean, you are the macro photographer, you know that, but I'm just saying it for the general audience. You have to keep in mind which distance you want to maintain to your subject, right? So what is it? Is it 70 centimeters, 30 centimeters, whatever? If the 78 centimeter working distance with the MC20 attached, and, well, not working distance, keep in mind, working distance, so, 5 steps back. Working distance is the distance from the front end of the lens to the subject. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the focus distance, which is camera to subject, and that is 78 centimeters. The lens itself is around about 220 centimeters, so we've got a working distance of around half a meter. If you want to work at half a meter, reproduction ratio 1:1, then you can definitely replace the 90mm macro with the 50-200 and the MC20. If that's the working distance that you want to get. If you want to work in a different distance, then, or with a lighter setup, then you have to keep in mind what's the working distance that your 90mm macro gives you for your subjects. And that is something that you have to know, because honestly, At the moment, I do not own a 90mm macro. I'm still contemplating purchasing that. I rented it for a couple of months, a year ago, something like that, but I haven't purchased one yet. So I know how it performs optically, but I haven't, I cannot make a direct practical comparison. Also, while I'm a macro photographer to a degree, it's not my main thing, right? Be that as it may, you have to consider and look at your EXIF data, OM systems record that, what's the distance that you're working at. If you're working at 1 meter, then you might want to get this one, it's okay. So if you want to work at closer distances, then the 78 centimeters might not be the thing that you are looking for, or half a meter, right, from front to subject. So those are all things that you have to consider. But if you find out that you work mostly at half a meter from front lens to subject, then you should be good with this one. In terms of optical performance, of course, adding the MC20 will give you good images, but of course, a dedicated macro lens, which is purpose-built for this kind of work, is of course outperforming this lens at close focusing distances. Most likely. I'm saying most likely because I haven't done a lab test, and I'm very, very careful with jumping to conclusions without having the actual objective test data. So that is my point here. And also what I'd really I would actually recommend a different thing. I would recommend getting the 50-200 in addition to your 90 macro. I would keep that lens, honestly, because it's a very special high performance lens. And I would go about it like this. If you do birding and stuff like that, where you're going to need the 50-200 focal length range, then you're going to work with this one. And then when you have the occasional macro subject, you just attach the MC20 and you are good to go. So instead of bringing an extra lens, you just bring the MC20. That's probably the thing that I would advise you to do instead of replacing the 90 macro. Because if you are out on a dedicated macro photography trip, then go with the 90 macro, which is an outstanding lens. And yeah, I'm looking forward to reviewing this one in the future as well, which I'm probably able to do thanks to your support. So that's great. Then there is another contribution from from Ronnie, who was actually the first person to comment. So cheers to you, Ronnie. I had the 100-400 Mark II, returned it when I got the 50-200, and that is definitely a sound choice. In fact, I'm also contemplating whether I still need the 100-400 Mark II, and honestly, in terms of optical performance, not really, because the 50-200, as I said, with the teleconverter is very, very, very close to the 100-400, but there is one thing, and I just want to bring that up really quick, just for the sake of completion, right? And because we are having a good time, at least I am having a good time here. Hope you are as well. Let's transition over there. And here in the browser, so that is again the review. And let's scroll down there. Here's the comparison. As you can see, the 100-400 Mark II is of course smaller than the 50-200. Comes at a price, right? It's a purpose-built lens for this focal length range, and the 50-200 is a ultra high performance lens. It's something very different, also different price tag and everything. But really, the 100-400 is of course very compact for what it is. So if that's so this is really why I'm most likely keeping the 100. So this is why I'm not selling the 100-400 really, because sometimes I just want to throw this one in the bag and just roll with it, and then yeah, that's the point. Also, I put a lot of effort in there getting this little white covering around this lens, because to make it more heat-proof in hot Viennese summers, right? So I'm not gonna sell this one really quick. So yeah, but absolutely, if you've bought the 50-200, you do not necessarily need the 100-400. Great. So I think we covered everything, and with that, I'm off to the kitchen where I'm going to prepare myself a second punch. But before I do that, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining. I'd like to say thanks for everyone who contributed with their questions, but most importantly, I would like to thank everyone who was willing to become a channel member, who was willing to support my work. It is really important. I can only highlight that if you want me to make content like this one, because honestly, so far I'm basically, it's very expensive to make these reviews, to be honest. So be that as it may, thanks for joining, thanks for your support. I hope you will be able to get amazing images during winter, during holiday times with your loved ones. We will talk again next year, but we will also talk on Instagram, and there will be occasional posts here and on Facebook, because really photography is my life and I love sharing some insights with you. So feel free to get in touch there, and stay tuned. Happy 2026 very, very soon, right? So happy holidays, everyone. Thanks. And Ronnie, thank you very much for your willingness to join. That is, I just like, so thanks for everyone who's joining the channel. That's really important. Thanks everyone. Thanks everyone. Goodbye.